During a televised congressional hearing, Patricia Bennett, a white former attorney general, stared directly at Jane Carter and suggested she return to her ancestral homeland. Jane's response wasn't boisterous, but it was piercing. She didn't engage in a dispute. Instead, she unveiled a Justice Department dossier revealing years of racial bias under Bennett's tenure. Tougher penalties for black defendants, political directives to target minorities for electoral gain. So, what unfolds when truth confronts authority and stands its ground? Stay tuned. This tale demands your full attention. Stick around and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe for the rest of this story. Washington, D.C., Wednesday morning. The air outside was crisp and cutting, like a sharpened edge. Inside the Capitol, hearing room 4A was filled to capacity. Every public seat had been claimed since dawn. Cameras crowded the room's rear. Network teams, journalists, independent broadcasters, all focused on 2 microphones at the heart of the hearing space. This wasn't an ordinary congressional meeting. It was an inquiry into racial prejudice within America's judicial system. Attendees didn't come to hear. They came to observe, to determine if justice in this nation truly operates impartially or merely averts its gaze from certain complexions. Seated on the left was Jane Carter, a black congresswoman from Oregon, a former defense lawyer with over 100 trial wins. Dressed in a navy suit, she sat erect, commanding the room's attention like a maestro directing an orchestra. Jane wasn't there to put on a show. She was there to make a case. She represented a rising force in America, youthful, brilliant, and fearless in exposing systemic flaws, armed not just with fervor, but with evidence. Opposite her sat Patricia Bennett, California's former attorney general, blonde, poised, radiating the cool assurance of a seasoned litigator. Her career rested on hardline crime policies, lauded by conservatives, condemned by civil rights advocates for unequal prosecution patterns. Today, she wasn't wielding authority. She was expected to respond. Yet, this wasn't merely a clash between 2 officials. It was a confrontation between 2 visions of America, one pushing for reform, accountability, and fairness, the other defending tradition, stability, and the anxiety that change might unravel a nation reluctant to face its imperfections. 2 women, 2 races, 2 perspectives on America, and one pressing question lingering. Does justice in this country notice skin color? The room grew quiet. Cameras were fixed, their red lights flashing steadily like expectant eyes. Papers ceased shuffling. Phones were muted. Reporters poised pens above notepads, ready not just to record, but to seize a defining moment. This was that kind of morning, one etched in history's margins, unforgettable. A senior clerk rose and announced the session's start. The Committee on Justice and Civil Rights is now convened. Seats adjusted, attire straightened. The chairman, a gray-haired man from Maine with a gravelly voice, gave brief opening remarks, then gestured to Jane Carter. She cleared her throat once, not from nerves, but to sharpen her focus. Her gaze didn't wander. It held the room, resolute. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, committee members. Today, I stand not as an opponent, but as an observer of a pattern we've all noticed, yet few have called out. I hope we can explore not just laws. Her words were cut short. Patricia Bennett leaned in, her tone polished, precise, and laced with unmistakable disdain. Perhaps, she said, instead of lecturing America on justice, you should return to your origins and examine them first. The silence was immediate and icy. Not a stunned hush, but a calculated, chilling pause. A moment passed, then another. A young black aide glanced aside. A woman in the audience gasped, her hand stalled mid-reach for her coffee. A faint curse was muttered under someone's breath. Then, nothing. Just the heavy presence of those words, lingering between microphones and marble pillars, shattering any facade of civility. Jane didn't waver. She didn't shrink back. She didn't raise her voice. She remained utterly still, a stillness that signaled not bewilderment, but mastery. Her hands rested lightly on the table, her posture unruffled, unaffected by the stirring turmoil around her. Only her eyes shifted. They rose slowly, locking onto Patricia Bennett with calm precision. No fury burned in them, but something sharper. Focus. Her expression didn't condemn, it assessed. Across the chamber, aides fidgeted. A journalist froze mid-sentence, pen suspended over paper. The room's tension pivoted, no longer fixated on the slight, but on the reply about to unfold. Then Jane's voice emerged, deliberate, composed, and crushing in its simplicity. "Pardon me," she said quietly. "What did you just say?" It wasn't a plea, it was a confrontation. The question didn't fill the space, it cleared it, compelling everyone to face the ugliness now exposed, undeniable. No murmurs, no echoes, just the taut awareness of a room transformed from legal formality to moral reckoning. Jane stayed motionless, yet her presence grew larger. Her tone held no defensiveness, only clarity, precision, and a hint that something far greater than a retort was coming. Patricia Bennett stood, her movements slow, almost ritualistic, a calm that didn't blunt a strike but honed it. She didn't stumble, she didn't shout. Her actions were deliberate, practiced, as if she'd already resolved to stand firm. Her gaze swept the room, bypassing cameras, aides, and lawmakers, and fixed on Jane. Her hand smoothed her blazer's edge, a small motion that seemed composed, but felt like donning armor. Then she leaned forward slightly, adjusted the microphone, and spoke with a clarity meant to resonate not just in the chamber, but in every American household. "I meant," she said, "if you find this nation so flawed, so unjust, perhaps you should return to your homeland and address its issues instead." The words didn't reverberate, not because they lacked volume, but because they struck too swiftly, too forcefully, too pointedly. For an instant, the air itself seemed to halt, not a quiet silence, but a tense one, as if everyone was compelled to hold their breath simultaneously. A senator in the back shifted uneasily, but stayed silent. An aide dropped her pen and left it on the floor. The camera crew held still, though one zoomed in closer, as if to capture the disgrace more vividly. Nationwide, millions of screens replayed the statement, unfiltered, unedited, on every news outlet, with subtitles already rolling. The words didn't merely offend, they exposed. They split open something long buried beneath formal attire and diplomatic rhetoric. At that moment, it wasn't about discourse or politics. It was about what was uttered, and the reality that it was spoken into a live microphone, preserved in official records. No one could feign ignorance. Patricia had hurled her words like a spear, but once they left her, they were no longer hers. The silence that followed belonged to Jane, and everyone sensed it. Jane didn't recoil. She didn't gesture wildly. She didn't call for quiet. She didn't yell. What she did was far worse for those hoping she'd falter. She remained still for a prolonged moment, breathing steadily, eyes slightly lowered, as if weighing not just her words, but their delivery. Then she rose. Her chair's legs scraped softly, loud enough in the hush to draw attention. She didn't hurry, didn't dramatize. She simply pushed her chair back and stepped from the table. Her heels tapped lightly on the marble. She moved forward, not toward Patricia, but to the room's center. The space between the rows felt like a platform, yet she wasn't acting. She was staking her claim. By the time she reached the middle, every gaze, from aides to senators to camera operators, was riveted on her. She stood tall, hands at her sides, expression steady. She didn't need to amplify her voice. The room was already hers. When she spoke, her tone was gentle but carried clearly, unwavering. "I was born in Oregon," she said, pausing briefly before continuing. "My father served in the U.S. military. He donned the uniform, followed commands, risked his life for this nation. My mother, a nurse, cared for patients without questioning their beliefs or skin color. She simply helped. That's how we were raised, to serve, to persevere, to trust in a country that hasn't always trusted us." She inhaled, and the room shifted. Some averted their eyes. Others leaned closer, attentive. "But my story doesn't begin with them," she went on. "It begins with those who never got to share theirs. My ancestors didn't choose to come here. They didn't pursue the American dream. They were bound, chained, ripped from their homes, dragged across the Atlantic like freight, crammed into ships so tightly they couldn't stand. They were sold, marked, forced to toil on stolen land. For centuries, they were told they weren't citizens, not even human. Yet they survived. They persisted. Her voice held no anger, only truth, weighty, rooted, undeniable. And somehow, she said, despite it all, they held faith in something greater. They resisted. They built. They gave life to people like me who still believe in this nation, even when it overlooks us." She now turned her gaze directly, unflinchingly, to Patricia Bennett. Her tone remained steady, but her eyes sharpened, not with hatred or fury, but with piercing clarity. "You tell me to return to my homeland," her voice firm as granite. "Let me make this clear. I was here before your birth. My family's blood soaked this soil before your family ever owned property. We were here before your laws granted us the vote, before your schools allowed us to learn, before your streets bore our names in history." Her voice didn't rise, but its gravity deepened with each word. "You see me as an outsider, but I'm not the visitor here. I'm the bedrock. You don't get to tell me to leave a house built on my ancestors' labor. You can't erase the pain, the effort, the dignity that preceded your presence in this chamber. No gasps now, just silence. Thick, charged, attentive." Jane's voice softened further. "You say I should go back, that I should leave. My people perished here. They birthed families here. They were buried without names, without markers, without justice. But they stayed, and I remain." She paused, not for cheers, not for effect, but to let the weight settle. She scanned the room, not seeking approval, just ensuring no one could evade her words. "So no," she said quietly but firmly, "I'm not leaving. I'm not going back. I belong here, and I'm not the one who needs reminding." Jane had reclaimed her heritage, but now she turned to what power dreads most: evidence. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't alter her tone. But something changed. Her posture solidified, her shoulders squared, her hands steady. Her voice, now slightly firmer, shifted from recollection to proof. She returned to her seat briefly, reaching for a plain black leather folder beneath her desk. The moment she drew out the document, the room's atmosphere shifted. It was dense, heavy. A light gray cover bore a red diagonal stamp. "Confidential DOJ California 2018. Some heads turned, others froze. She didn't brandish it, didn't hold it aloft. She walked it to the center, held it at waist level, and looked directly at Patricia Bennett. No anger, no smirk, just a cold, unwavering focus that spoke volumes without excess. She raised the file slightly, enough for the panel to see the stamp. Then her voice returned, low, direct, incisive. "Ms. Bennett," she said, "I presume you recognize this. This report was filed with the U.S. Department of Justice in 2018, during your last year as California's Attorney General." No reply came, nor was one needed. The silence grew weightier, not just tense, but anticipatory. Jane opened the folder deliberately. Inside were pages, worn, highlighted, annotated. She knew it thoroughly, having studied it more times than she cared to admit. She turned to the first marked tab, thumb pressing firmly. The paper's rustle was the room's only sound. She didn't read immediately. She let the report's presence linger, breathe. Then she looked up, not at the crowd, not at the cameras, but into the face of the woman who'd told her to return to her roots. "This document," she stated clearly, "isn't an opinion. It's not rumor. I didn't author it. It's a federal study, conducted under your leadership, examining racial bias patterns in your state's prosecution system." She stood, file open, its weight seeming greater than its appearance. Her voice didn't escalate, but the room's tension did. Each page she turned intensified the silence. Every motion was slow, deliberate, like diffusing a bomb in public. No haste, no theatrics, just relentless truth. She reached the first tab, her thumb grazing a chart spanning half the page, its yellow highlight stark under the lights, bold, inescapable. She didn't seek applause. She looked down and read. Per this internal review from California's Department of Justice, Black defendants received sentence recommendations averaging 32% longer than white defendants for identical charges. She looked up, not theatrically, but directly, as if asking, "Can anyone justify that figure?" No one did. She continued, "Same crime, same courtroom, sometimes the same judge, yet one gets probation, another years." She turned to the next tab. A red note jutted out like a scar. Her eyes skimmed the paragraph briefly, then she read aloud. Prosecutors exhibited a documented tendency, those are the words used, to escalate charges when a defendant's surname suggested African or Hispanic origins. The only variable was the name, not the evidence, not the facts, just the name. Her voice didn't waver, but it slowed. It had to. These weren't mere numbers. They were lives. A surname like Martinez, Abdul, or King could mean the difference between community service and incarceration. The report doesn't guess at motives. It doesn't need to. The data speaks loudly enough. She flipped another page, more slowly, the kind of pace that makes breaths catch. Page 47, she said softly. Details wrongful arrests statewide. 87% occurred in predominantly Black or Latino areas. 97%. She paused, letting it sink in, then proceeded. Of those cases, under 5% led to any formal apology. None, 0, resulted in financial compensation. People were detained, removed from their homes, shamed, sometimes held for days, then released. No explanation. No accountability, no justice. The figures were damning, the trends irrefutable. But what followed silenced even the staunchest skeptic, a statement from one of their own. The pages no longer trembled in Jane's hands. Her voice, calm, almost measured, resembled a judge delivering a long overdue verdict. She didn't heighten her tone or embellish the moment. She read, slowly, distinctly. "And here," she said, turning gently to a tabbed page near the back, her thumb resting on a paragraph marked in pale orange, "is a direct quote from a memo by your senior legal advisor. No prelude, no framing." She glanced at the page, then up, and with unwavering calm, read the sentence aloud, each word cutting like a scalpel. "Upper leadership exerts pressure to intensify enforcement against minority suspects, particularly in election years, to secure support from the base." The words didn't resound. They didn't need to. They lingered, dense, oppressive, like a mist no one could deny. The ensuing silence wasn't uneasy. It was stifling. No papers shuffled, no strategies were whispered. Even the cameras seemed to pause, as if wary of missing a beat. In the back, someone murmured, barely audible, "My God, she found it." An aide gasped, softly, but enough for a colleague to tense. A senator muttered, rubbing his face. No one looked at Patricia Bennett, not yet. All eyes remained on Jane, who stood like granite, steady, unyielding. Then she closed the folder slowly, the motion gentle. Not a slam, not a flourish, just final. Her hands rested atop the file as she lifted her head, her gaze fixed on the woman who'd just told her to leave. Jane didn't blink. She didn't smile. She spoke, voice steady, eyes locked, as if addressing a courtroom long in denial. "You told me to return to my homeland," her tone bare of all but truth. "Perhaps you should revisit the records of the nation you helped govern." Her words didn't strike like gunfire. They landed like stones, building a barrier of reality no one could surmount. Justice isn't born from rhetoric, speeches, or spin. It doesn't come from shouting or speaking first. It comes from bravery and confronting truth, even when it's harsh, even when it's yours. No response came from Bennett, nor was one expected. Her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her face ashen, her expression caught between disbelief and ruin. She didn't reach for the microphone. She didn't interrupt, for there was nothing to say that could erase what was spoken, or worse, what was proven. Jane stepped back once, not for show, not for the cameras, just to let the air shift. Yet her presence didn't diminish. It grew because the silence now belonged to her. It was no longer the uneasy pause after an insult. It was the heavy stillness that follows truth, delivered so plainly, so clearly, that argument becomes impossible. "You speak of law and order," she said, her voice quieter now, yet still razor-sharp. "But what I see is selective fairness, engineered fear, a system designed not to shield all but to preserve power for a few." She paused, surveying the room. Now, eyes met hers. Not all, not loudly, but enough. Enough to sense the ground had shifted, even in this place where denial dresses in suits and calls itself policy. The silence turned. Across the aisle, a Democratic senator gave a single, slow nod. Opposite, a Republican member, older, gray, rarely breaking party lines, offered a faint, almost imperceptible head tilt. No applause, no grand gestures, just recognition, the kind that emerges when even political defenses can't shield the indefensible. Jane exhaled slowly, not in relief, but in control. All she'd brought, her testimony, her heritage, the document, the truth, had been laid bare before the nation. She didn't need to persuade anyone. She needed them to hear, to know, and they did. The hearing concluded, but the moment lingered, for some truths, once voiced, don't remain confined. They travel, they spread, and they don't seek permission. As Jane stepped from the podium to her seat, the video was already being edited. An aide, phone low, captured it. A reporter in the back, streaming live to 20,000 silent viewers, did too. Then it was out. 10 seconds, 20 seconds, a full minute. Clips hit TikTok first, then Twitter, then YouTube. Some had no captions, no edits, no filters, just raw footage. Jane Carter in the U.S. Capitol's heart, folder in hand, staring down a former attorney general and saying, "You want me to go back to my homeland? Review the nation you led." It spread like wildfire, not for its volume, but for its authenticity. Authentic in a way that pierced politics, partisanship, and the fatigue of endless news cycles. It wasn't a debate or a scandal. It was a moment, and it resonated differently. The clip garnered 3 million views in 6 hours, 10 million by day's end. It trended on X, was woven into thousands of TikToks, looped on political podcasts, late-night shows, and Instagram reels. But its impact wasn't just its reach, it was who shared it and why. A retired U.S. Marine shared the video, writing, "This wasn't a dispute. It was a shot through every falsehood I was taught about justice." A professor tweeted a transcript, noting, "Teaching this tomorrow. No notes. This is courage." Then there was a father, a white man in his 40s, in a modest Pennsylvania living room, posting a video of himself and his son watching Jane's speech. The boy, perhaps 12, eyes wide, hands still. The father stayed silent as the clip played, but when it ended, the boy turned and said, "She sounds like Grandpa talking about the war." The man, voice breaking, faced the camera and said, "I watched this with my son, and I'm proud he cried." The comments exploded. Thousands replied. Veterans, educators, nurses, laborers, parents, teens, retirees, black, white, brown. People divided on everything, now united by something stronger than politics. The jolt of hearing truth spoken without hesitation. Some said it echoed their own silences, their fears, the times they wished they'd spoken but didn't. One comment read, "I didn't know how much I needed someone to say it like that." Calm, direct, unyielding. Another said, "This wasn't just about race, it was about dignity, and it showed how far we still must go." In Atlanta barbershops, it played on screens. In Detroit classrooms, students who'd never watched a congressional hearing discussed it. In Oklahoma diners and Ohio gas stations, people viewed it over coffee, some nodding quietly, others shaking their heads, but all watching, truly watching. On cable news, the debate shifted from whether the system was biased to whether this hearing had permanently altered the discourse. Analysts sought statements. Patricia Bennett declined interviews. Her office issued a single line, "No comment at this time." It didn't help. The silence only affirmed what Jane's voice had made undeniable. Even cautious lawmakers couldn't dodge the wave. Some voiced support openly, others stayed silent, their quiet stark against the nation's rising voice. The hearing wasn't just recorded, it was replayed on phones, in emails, in minds. It wasn't fading. In interviews, Jane said little. She didn't chase the spotlight. She didn't capitalize on the moment. Asked how she felt about the viral clip, she said, "I didn't speak for cameras. I spoke because it was necessary. That's why it struck harder than most headlines, because it wasn't crafted for sound bites. It was a truth bomb detonated in a space built for polite fictions, and it shattered barriers." The camera stopped, and the nation seemed to move on. But not everyone emerged unscathed. Some truths don't explode. They erode, hour by quiet hour. Patricia Bennett sat alone, not just physically, though that was true too. Her staff had dispersed. Aides, usually buzzing with notebooks and water bottles, were absent. No journalists pursued her for quotes. No senators offered a handshake or a "we'll talk later." Just silence, dense, unfamiliar. She sat on a cold marble bench in a Capitol back hallway, far from bright lights and bold voices. The hearing room, now empty, its chairs in disarray, still held the charge of what had transpired an hour before. Patricia had exited quietly through a side door, not from shame, not yet, but because she was unsure of her next move. For someone like her, that was new, even frightening. She stared at the floor, its black and white diamond tiles suddenly more intricate than she recalled. Each breath felt heavier than it should. She adjusted her jacket, smoothed her skirt, small acts to fill the quiet. But nothing worked, not with Jane's words still ringing, calm and relentless. Perhaps you should revisit the records of the nation you led. Patricia had faced tough rooms before, judges, reporters, scandals, smear campaigns. But this was different. This wasn't a story to spin or a post to deflect. This had struck deep, not just publicly, but within. Without warning, her mind drifted, not to the televised moment, but to a memory long buried. She was 22, in law school, broke, proud, naive. She'd parked illegally on university grounds, no permit, with a half-empty wine bottle in her car, forgotten from a prior night. Campus security spotted it, called the police. It could have been serious. Minor in possession, vehicle violation, illegal alcohol transport. Her clerkship, internship, future, all at risk. But they weren't, thanks to Marcus. Marcus Daniels, a rare black student in her class, quiet, brilliant, kind. They weren't friends, just classmates. She barely recalled their conversations, but he saw her pacing outside, trembling, voice sharp with panic. He asked what was wrong. She told him, humiliated, angry. Without pause, he said, "Follow me." He knew a campus officer, a cousin, spoke to him, vouched for her, de-escalated it. The issue vanished. No report, no hearing, no record. Her path preserved. Patricia barely thanked him. A quick nod, a rushed thanks. She never asked why he helped, never mentioned it again. Within a year, she'd buried it in ambition's rush. Now, it returned vividly. She saw his face, heard his voice, felt the ease with which she'd moved on. Sitting there, she realized she'd never reciprocated, never checked on him, never acknowledged that another's kindness had saved her career's start. She swallowed hard. The hallway's cold lights hummed. Her fingers, clenched in her lap, stiffened. What if I'm wrong this time? The question was faint, not fully formed, but it pressed against her chest like a hidden bruise. Her career was built on certainty, on being unshakable. But now the armor felt empty, as if she held a shield without knowing what she defended. Jane hadn't shouted. That's what lingered. She hadn't attacked. She'd simply stated the truth. And the worst part, it wasn't cruel. It was precise, measured, devastating. Because Patricia wasn't just challenged. She was seen, stripped of titles, years, rhetoric. She faced the hardest mirror, herself. No one offered support, no hand extended, no comforting words, because deep down, everyone in that room knew the truth before Jane spoke. They just didn't expect it to be said so clearly. Patricia blinked. Her eyes stung, but tears didn't come. She wasn't crying, not quite. She wasn't built for that. But she wasn't steady either, and that felt like defeat. She reached for her phone, then stopped. No message could fix this. No tweet could erase it. No statement could make the internet forget. They hadn't just seen her falter. They'd seen her unravel. Worse, they'd seen her learn, perhaps for the first time. Within those walls, a rare truth had been spoken without apology. But outside, the world churned, and Jane knew some battles required facts, others fire. The noise hit first, muffled, then swelling, a chorus of voices rising outside the hallway like a tide. The press was waiting, as always, but this time they weren't just reporting. They were chasing a moment no one expected to unfold live. Jane stood behind the hearing room's heavy oak doors, hands resting on the leather folder she'd carried to the podium. It felt lighter now, as if its burden had shifted from her to the air. She took a deep breath. Not to steady herself. She was steady. She needed focus. Behind her, the chamber emptied. Committee members slipped out side exits, some avoiding her gaze, others glancing briefly before turning away. No one approached. No one sought a quote. They didn't need to. The room had spoken, and no voice had countered her in those final moments. A young staffer opened the doors. The sound surged, reporters shouting, cameras flashing, a throng held back by ropes and security, all aimed at her. Jane adjusted her blazer. No mirror, no hair check. She gripped the folder, stepped forward, and entered the fray. Flashbulbs illuminated her instantly. a wall of light like waves crashing on rock. Questions bombarded. Congresswoman Carter, will you pursue ethics charges? How do you address claims your remarks were divisive? Should Patricia Bennett step down from her advisory role? She didn't respond at once. She walked slowly, measured steps down the marbled hall, her heels' clicks drowned by the clamor. Guards flanked her loosely, not guiding, but matching her pace, as if they knew she needed space, not protection. She reached the press line, a crescent of microphones, reporters, and streaming phones. She stopped, and the chaos shifted because Jane Carter didn't flinch. She didn't wave, didn't smile, didn't signal for quiet. She looked ahead, locked eyes with the nearest camera, and waited until the crowd hushed, realizing silence would yield answers. "Let me be clear," she began, voice steady, resonant without shouting. "Today's events weren't planned. I didn't enter that room seeking conflict." Reporters leaned in, notebooks poised, phones ready. But I came ready to speak truth. And when I was told, before my peers and the nation, to return to my homeland, I faced a choice. She paused, not for drama, but for clarity. I could have answered with anger. I could have left. Or I could do what black women in this country have done for generations. Stay, remain composed, and speak regardless. The flashes slowed, less frantic, more deliberate. What you witnessed wasn't an assault. It wasn't even a defense. It was a reflection. And some weren't prepared for what it showed. She raised the folder, now closed, but present. This report isn't about me. It's about years of data, patterns, pain buried under red tape. That pain deserves more than silence. It demands action. The reporters stopped shouting. They wrote, recorded, watched. Not for slip-ups, but for meaning. So no, I don't regret my words. I don't regret citing those figures. And I don't regret facing someone and telling them the truth about the nation they shaped. She scanned the line, eye to eye, lens to lens. This isn't about parties. It's not left versus right. It's right versus wrong. Today, we saw the distinction. For a moment, no one stirred. No follow-up, no rush. Just a rare pause in American politics. A breath. Then questions resumed. Slower, more precise. Congresswoman, are you pushing for a federal probe into the DOJ's findings? Will you propose legislation on sentencing disparities? She raised a hand, not to hush, but to signal a final point. I'm not here to launch a campaign. I'm here to remind this nation what justice looks like, unfiltered by comfort. If that unsettles people, they should question why, not deflect. Then she turned, quietly thanked the press, and walked on, through the lights, the noise, the history forming beneath her steps. Behind her, reporters filed stories, clips uploaded instantly, hashtags surged. But Jane didn't glance back. She didn't need to. The work lay ahead, and the nation was finally watching. Not all reckonings are public. Some arrive quietly, through a blinking cursor, an open laptop, a silence no camera captures. The house was still. No aides, no press calls, no crews on standby. Just a heavy, airless quiet after a day of noise. Patricia Bennett sat alone at her beachfront home's kitchen table, hands cradling a coffee mug untouched for an hour. The coffee was cold, like the aura once tied to her name, her title, her presence. Her phone, face down on the marble counter, buzzed intermittently with notifications she couldn't bear to read. Mentions, headlines, hashtags. She didn't need to see them. She knew. The clip was everywhere. Jane Carter's steady voice, her own frozen expression, the silence that engulfed the room when Jane read the DOJ memo aloud. It wasn't just humiliation, it was exposure. For the first time in years, no one came to her aid. Her laptop sat open, screen blank, cursor blinking. She hadn't meant to write. Her instinct, honed over 2 decades in public life, was to shape the narrative, deflect, deny, claim misunderstanding, insist she was defending, not attacking. The usual strategy. But this time her hands wouldn't move. Her instincts faltered because she knew. She leaned on the table, head heavy. Outside, California's sky faded from orange to dusk, but inside, she felt adrift. Then, without clear intent, she typed, "Congresswoman Carter." Too stiff, too formal. She erased it, tried again. "I don't expect absolution. I'm not sure I've earned it. But I need to say what I failed to in that room, what I should have known long before." Her fingers paused, then continued. The words came slowly, like stones, heavy, deliberate. "We don't see the currents we swim in until someone pulls the plug. This week, you did that for me." She stopped. The silence deepened. On the table lay a folder, printouts of the DOJ investigation Jane had cited. Patricia had glanced at it post-hearing, then read it fully, page by page. No interruptions. She couldn't deny it now. The numbers, the language, the patterns, they were real, as was the burden she'd long ignored. She typed again. "I wasn't ready to confront it, because it's simpler to cast yourself as the hero, even when the facts say otherwise." Then a memory surfaced, vivid, unbidden. Law school, 22, a parking violation that could have escalated, a forgotten wine bottle in her car, a guard ready to act. And Marcus Daniels. Marcus, a year ahead, quiet, brilliant. Black saw her frantic outside the law building. She'd never sought help, but he offered, spoke to an officer he knew, calmed it. The issue disappeared. No report, no consequences. Her future intact. She'd barely thanked him. A quick thanks, then gone. She never asked why he helped, never revisited it. Until tonight. She swallowed. "Once, someone like you altered my life's path. I forgot. I buried it. I never repaid it." Her fingers stilled. "You didn't shame me in that hearing. You didn't diminish me. You showed me a mirror, and I saw the self I've avoided too long." She exhaled. "I saw the woman who ignored reports unread, the leader who spoke without hearing, the person who, in one sentence, told an American she didn't belong when she only spoke truth." Patricia leaned back, eyes burning but dry. Not crying, but something inside had fractured. She reviewed the screen. The words weren't polished, not for headlines or strategy. They were raw. She continued, "This isn't a press release. It's not for cameras. My team doesn't know I'm writing. I may never send it. But if you read this, know you were right. Not just in your words, but in your delivery." She sat, hand still. Then, unthinking, she saved the draft, closed the laptop. She didn't send it. Not tonight. She wasn't ready for forgiveness, but she was ready to bear the weight of her role, her ignorance. For the first time in years, Patricia Bennett sat in silence, not fleeing it. Not all change begins in Washington. Some starts in quiet spaces, far from grand halls and microphones, like a classroom where the future learns to see today anew. Fluorescent lights hummed softly. It was third period at Oak Ridge Middle School, the air thick, as if a storm had passed, but lingered. Ms. Lena Hayward stood by the classroom's front, remote in hand, a stack of ungraded quizzes under the other. The smartboard glowed with a paused YouTube clip. Jane Carter, mid-speech, calm, eyes forward. The students were unusually still. No whispers, no restless feet, no paper wads. They were focused. That morning, Ms. Hayward had seen the clip over coffee. It wasn't part of her lesson on Reconstruction or civil rights, but Jane's unwavering presence amid power stayed with her. She watched it again during planning, then again. By lunch, she'd decided, She cued the clip to the moment Jane transformed the hearing into something lasting, historic. 23 pairs of young eyes watched, awaiting the sound. Ms. Hayward pressed play. Jane's voice resumed, steady, unhurried. Justice isn't born from speeches. It's born from courage, from facing truth, even when it's yours. The clip ended. Silence, not the bored or tired kind, but one of processing, absorbing. Jane stood frozen on screen, folder in hand, resolute. No one moved. Then a hand rose. Marcus, quiet. Third row, observant, asked, "Is she in trouble for that?" Ms. Hayward eyed him thoughtfully. "Not formally," she said, "but speaking truth like that often brings challenges." Another hand. Sophia. Was the other woman, like her boss, there? "No," Ms. Hayward replied, "but she was once a state's attorney general." That sparked murmurs. Kids were used to TikTok challenges, not congressional ones. Deshawn, in the back, leaned forward. She said, "Go back, right there." Ms. Hayward nodded. "Yes, on record, on camera." Deshawn shook his head. "My grandma said if they don't strike you, they'll shame you." No laughs. It wasn't that kind of line. From the second row, Amaya half raised her hand. "She didn't shout," she said. Ms. Hayward nodded. "No, she didn't." Amaya continued. "She could have, but didn't." That's tougher. The room stilled. The insight carried weight, more than many TV pundits could muster, because Jane hadn't seized the room by force. She'd held it with restraint, exposing rather than destroying. Ms. Hayward let the silence linger, then walked to the whiteboard, marker in hand. She wrote boldly, "Courage isn't your voice's loudness. It's your truth's weight." She faced the class. Consider what we saw, not just the words, but their delivery, the evidence she presented, how she stood firm, how the room shifted, not from shouting, but from refusing to yield. Heads nodded. Even Jamal, usually disengaged, sat upright. "I'm not asking you to take sides," she said, "but to remember this. You'll see voices like hers and attempts to quiet them. When that happens, ask, what would I do in that room?" The question lingered. Some jotted notes. Others stared at Jane's image. Rachel, in the back, raised her hand. "My dad showed me this," she said. Said it reminded him of his mom's words. Truth is heavy, and most fear carrying it. Ms. Hayward smiled faintly. "He's right." The bell rang, but no one rushed. Some packed slowly, others stayed, asking more. As they left, Ms. Hayward glanced at Jane's frozen image, eyes forward, unyielding. She thought of textbooks omitting such figures, of young minds waiting too long for such voices. In that Mississippi classroom, she closed the video. But the dialogue had just begun. The story unfolded in courts, classrooms, screens, streets. But the true question wasn't what was said. It was what we take from it, what we do next. Days later, the world didn't halt, but it paused, like a breath held too long. News cycles churned, scandals, bills, polls. But Jane Carter's voice pierced the clamor, not for its volume, not for centering herself, but for its clarity. In that clarity, something shifted, not just for those in the hearing, but for all who saw. It was as if a nation, accustomed to evasion, faced a mirror and stopped pretending it didn't know its reflection. The story could have ended with applause, silence, Patricia's broken expression, Jane's poised command. But real stories don't fade with claps or cameras. They begin when we ask what we carry forward. This wasn't just an insult or a hearing. It wasn't just two women or ideologies. It was about listening, not to data or drama, but to truth waiting generations to be heard. The lesson wasn't subtle. Injustice doesn't arrive loudly. It creeps in small choices. Memos buried, a shrug at bias, a chuckle at a wrong joke. silence when dignity is trampled. Jane's response was radical. Not for speaking truth, but for doing so where it's meant to be ignored, carrying her history, her ancestors, her communities, and laying it deliberately on a long, untouched table. What did she seek? Not cheers, not sympathy, but acknowledgement. That justice without reflection is performance, patriotism without accountability is pride, equality without memory is myth. For America to face its future honestly, it must confront its past. Not privately, but in raw, uneasy spaces. Congress's floor, a Mississippi classroom, a white father's living room where his son cried, not from sorrow, but from awakening. Jane woke people, not with noise, but stillness, not with anger, but precision. She reminded us, truth isn't fragile, but comfort is. People like her, told they don't belong, to be quieter, smaller, have upheld this nation with more dignity than its institutions. Descendants of the enslaved have guarded America's dream more than its powerful. Those most denied by the system often hold the deepest faith in its promise, the greatest courage to demand it. That's the tragedy and hope. Jane revealed not just the gap between words and deeds, but its cost in lives, freedom, families broken by sentencing, courtroom bias, the quiet racism of a neutral system. Yet she stood. She didn't flee, didn't waver, didn't seek shelter. She sought to be heard. In that, something sacred occurred. For a moment, the nation stopped justifying itself. It listened. That's where it all begins. Systems don't shift through shame, but through reckoning, publicly admitting what's true and daring to improve. Jane's strength wasn't anger, it was grace. Grace born of pain, that neither excused nor forgot, but chose to speak, not scream, to seek truth, not revenge, clarity, not collapse. What do we do with that? Watching isn't enough. Sharing isn't enough. We must live, speak, vote, teach differently. We must tell the truth, when it stings, when it implicates us, when it unravels safe stories. Jane didn't close a debate. She opened a reckoning. That weight now rests on us. Admiring courage isn't enough. We must choose the story we'll stand in and what we'll risk to change it. Jane taught us, silence isn't neutral. It's not a shield or escape. It's a choice, favoring the system needing no defense. The room wasn't built for her voice. It was designed to mute it, blunt its edge, trap it in decorum, drown it in delay. But she refused. That refusal cracked something, not just in Congress or online, but in us. In every viewer who saw themselves in her calm, every listener who heard the unspoken. If I can carry truth into fire, why can't you speak it in safety? The question isn't what Jane will do next. It's what we will do. Injustice doesn't end in hearings. It ends in classrooms, courts, homes. When someone reads a biased policy and doesn't look away, hears a cruel joke and doesn't laugh, stands, voice trembling, and says, "This isn't us. This isn't who we'll be." That's how change starts. Not with perfection, but persistence, applied repeatedly until walls shift. You don't need to run for office to fight injustice, but you must show up. At council meetings, in your child's curriculum, where laws are made, enforced, or twisted. Demand prosecutors face scrutiny. Judges reflect those they serve. Sentencing data is exposed, as Jane did. One folder silenced lawmakers. Imagine a nation armed with truth, unyielding. If you've never faced injustice, your duty is greater. Privilege isn't guilt. It's a tool. Unused, it becomes complicity. You don't need to be Jane, but you can stand with her. Speak when it's hard. Vote when it's inconvenient. Listen when it hurts. Learn when it's easier not to. Act when you're afraid, especially then. History won't note the silent. It will note who stood. If you're still wondering what to do, start. Start where you are, with your voice, vote, values. In a world telling Jane to sit, she stood. In a nation urging her to leave, she answered with heritage and truth. In a moment most would have stayed quiet, she spoke. Now it's your turn. Thank you for staying with this story and joining us in this pursuit of justice. Your support is invaluable. Like, subscribe, and enable notifications to stay updated. Share your thoughts below. What moved you most? Together, our voices matter.